Could the navies of the United States and China be headed towards a showdown in the South China Sea? That's the worst-case scenario, but it's not impossible. The reason? Long-standing disputes between China and its Southeast Asian neighbors over control of the sea have suddenly become a new source of tension between Washington and Beijing. Look at any Chinese map of the region. Almost all the waters of the South China Sea, nearly 1 million square miles, and believed to contain vast underwater deposits of oil and natural gas, are marked as China's maritime territory. According to Beijing, it's a claim rooted in Chinese history.
For China, we say our ancestors used to occupy this island. So I have this book to show. Look, and my fishermen used to use the island to avoid a typhoon. It's all recorded. And there are so many vessels unearthed that carry Chinese porcelain. It's not Vietnamese porcelain. So we consider that 1,000 years ago, our people already used this sea lane of communication for China's interest. Therefore, the ancestors of them have the right to claim.
But the South China Sea is also bordered by Vietnam, Taiwan, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, and most of them have their own territorial claims, and for similar reasons. Not only the potentially rich natural resources, but the fact that 1/3 of the world's trade and much of Asia's oil pass through its sea lanes.
That area, why is China claiming sovereignty and some other countries are competing for sovereignty, is because of the energy supply, potential energy supply.
Over the years, these rival claims have led to numerous clashes between China and Vietnam, China and the Philippines, Taiwan and Vietnam, Vietnam and the Philippines and Malaysia. Despite its large naval presence in the Western Pacific, the United States has never taken sides in these disputes. Indeed, the South China Sea has been low on Washington's list of Asian concerns. But all that changed in July. Although still officially not taking sides, at an Asian regional forum in Vietnam, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton declared that the U.S. had a national interest in maintaining freedom of navigation in the area, in seeing disputes resolved in a collaborative diplomatic process without coercion, and that Washington was opposed to the use or threat of force by any party.
What's really astonishing about this, the statement itself sounds benign. It just sounds like a perfectly reasonable, responsible position that any state could take. And what that implies is the United States contests and will potentially seek to block China's claim, the realization of China's claim over the South China Sea. If you read between the lines, it was a sharp rebuke to China's position, and I'm sure that's how it was read in Beijing.
China's reaction was swift and angry.
A defense ministry official says China has indisputable sovereignty over islands in the South China Sea and the surrounding waters.
We oppose the internationalization of the South China Sea issue.
An editorial in the Global Times, published by the Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece, the People's Daily, was even tougher, warning that, quote, China will never waive its right to protect its core interests with military means. Indeed, it was China's use of the term core interest to describe the South China Sea that was a key factor in Washington's new, tougher approach.
In the spring, March to May period, Chinese officials, in conversations with American officials, announced that the South China Sea was now a core national interest of China, along the lines of Taiwan, Tibet, and Xinjiang. Completely unnegotiable issue of sovereignty. China's long claimed the South China Sea, but had never before elevated it to a core national interest. You usually think of core national interest, usually implies this is something we will fight for.
These comments followed what the U.S. saw as a series of increasingly muscular moves in the South China Sea. These included China's detention of Vietnamese fishermen in the disputed waters, warnings to U.S. oil companies not to engage in joint South China Sea exploration deals with other nations, and a Sino-American naval confrontation in the spring of 2009. Chinese vessels coming within just a few yards of the U.S. Navy surveillance ship, the Impeccable.
Chinese harassment.
Beijing's justification for harassing the Impeccable was that in addition to sovereignty over most of the South China Sea, China has a 200-mile exclusive economic zone that extends from any land feature bordering the sea.
And there is a dispute about what kind of activities countries can have in their exclusive economic zone. From the Chinese point of view, military activities that are harmful to the country that claims that EEZ should not be allowed. From the U.S. point of view, the activities that can be conducted in EEZ include military activities.
China's argument is that the U.S. Pentagon's ship, even unarmed ship of survey, military survey, inside China's EEZ constitute a non-innocence, constitute a harm, because it's military. Why you make such a mapping of the seabed in my economic zone? So China considers that I have a right to deny.
Beijing's assertiveness was coupled with intense pressure on Southeast Asian nations to negotiate their differences with China bilaterally, where, of course, China, given its size and clout, would have a significant advantage.
The assumption is that because you are so big and the other side is so small, if you do bilateral, that means you are engaging in unfair negotiation. So I think the South China Sea is becoming a sensitive spot today precisely because so many countries there are getting very uneasy about China's presence.
China's new attitude was coupled with a growing sense in Beijing of Chinese strength and deepening American weakness.
When we grow more strong, why we will be more subordinate, obedient to America. For China, we are getting more power. Yes, we can more assert our rights.
In the aftermath of the financial crisis, there were some judgments in Beijing that the United States was weakened, distracted by Iraq and Afghanistan, and that this gave China more running room. China emerged from the financial crisis relatively unscathed. And I do think that there were some people in China who saw this as an opportunity to try and exert China's influence and perhaps even further weaken U.S. influence in the region.
Under the circumstances, Vietnam and several other members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, urged the Obama administration to adopt a tougher line, something Washington was ready to do precisely to counter the impression of weakness.
The Obama administration, I think, realized that China had drawn this conclusion and was worried about the potential for miscalculation as a result of this judgment. And therefore, I do think that there has been a concerted judgment and decision in Washington to ensure that China understands that we are present in the Asia-Pacific region. We are not weaker. We are not distracted.
Indeed, Secretary of State Clinton's declaration in Hanoi also coincided with joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises off the Korean coast. Although aimed at deterring North Korea, an angry Beijing saw them as yet another example of American muscle flexing in waters close to China.
我们坚决反对任何外国的军用舰机在黄海及其他中国的近海从事影响中国安全的活动。
Taken together, the U.S. moves fueled a sense among many Chinese that Washington is trying to block China's rise.
Well, I think this is a widespread concern. I think if you interview some of these military top brass, and they would lambast the United States for another imperialistic design against China. You know, they are trying to encircle China. They are trying to suffocate China, its strategic space
The United States is trying to shape China's rise, but certainly trying to shape and constrain China's rise so that it rises into one kind of power, not another. And especially a power, I think, that continues to respect and acknowledge American supremacy, American leadership globally. That's what it looks like the United States wants from a rising China, and that's what it looks like Chinese elites now at least want to contest.
In both Washington and Beijing, domestic politics limit the ability of either government to back down. President Obama can't risk being accused of being soft on China. His Chinese counterparts have the same problem.
This has been the position of the Chinese government since 1949. So say, in the time of Chairman Mao, the central government says we claim sovereignty over these islands. And today, any leadership, if you will come in and say, I think we probably need to give away that kind of sovereignty, no leadership can do this.
This is a very complex relationship. It needs to be managed very carefully on both sides. I think it's important for both of our countries, the United States and China, to be very realistic and understand that we do have areas of interests that clash.
To a worryingly long list of divergent interests troubling U.S.-China relations, therefore, a new one can now be added: how to handle the potentially volatile conflict over the South China Sea. I'm Mike Chinoy.